The Great Exhibition of 1851 was the brainchild of Prince Albert and was designed to showcase the products of many countries to the rest of the world, but especially the products of Great Britain. And the commission actually was established in January 1850, and it immediately set up a building committee which included people such as Isambard, King of Brunel, Robert Stephenson, Charles Barry, and various notable lords, and it was chaired by William Cubitt, and they had a competition to design a building, and there were some quite monstrosities, including brick built structures which were all to be built in Hyde Park. But of course building such brick buildings would have destroyed a lot of the park, and it was when the whole concept of the building was being discussed and just what it could do, that the gardener Joseph Paxton, who'd built a number of glass houses for the Duke of Devonshire at Chatsworth House and various other water features, he proposed a glass house to the committee. And this is the design, a real back of the envelope sort of design that he came up with to demonstrate the sort of structure he had in mind. And the whole thing took a lot of planning and design work, of course, but basically it was a modular structure and of wood, iron and glass, and this whole modular structure would then be assembled, and in these illustrations you can see how the structure came together. So it was broken down into a series of basic units, and these could then be established, built on site. And because it was a glass house, it could be built over the top of the existing trees, so none of the foliage in Hyde Park was affected, and it used a lot of glass, of course, practically the whole glass output of Britain for a number of months, and it was constructed very rapidly. They had a very clever system of taking the curved roofs elements up, for example, as you can see in these images, and they were taken up at a slant and then taken to the horizontal and then fitted in place. This is of course all by manpower and very simple cranes. The roofing was put on, the glaziers actually sat in a little trolley that ran on the ribs of the structure like a little railway, and as they moved along they could move it along and put the panes of glass into place. So the whole thing opened, this magnificent Great Exhibition opened on the 1st of May 1851. It was opened by Queen Victoria. It was the first World Fair essentially, and it was an extraordinary success. There were about 100,000 objects in the building, from about 15,000 contributors, and of course British objects absolutely dominated the exhibition, although there were a number of others. They grouped the exhibits into 4 categories of raw materials, machinery, manufactures, and fine arts, and they had everything from the Kohinoor diamond and porcelain and hydraulic presses, fire engines, steam engines of course, and all sorts of weird and wonderful things, including various stuffed animals positioned in rather bizarre poses. But it was a tremendous success. Altogether almost 1 million visitors came, and they bought all sorts of commemorative items, of which this little scarf is one of them. But they travelled, it really taxed the early railway network, bringing people to a great exhibition, and they were charged varying prices, and sometimes as low as 1 shilling for a weekday price, but as much as 5 shillings on the very busy Saturdays. And the whole event anyway produced so much money, about surplus of about £190,000 in 1851, that it could pay to build the permanent Victoria and Albert Museum, the Science Museum and the Natural History Museum, all on land which they purchased in South Kensington, so it established the Museum Quarter of London. and it had various novel aspects about it, including the first public lavatories, and for which he paid a penny, and probably the phrase spending a penny comes from that. Anyway, at the end of the year it closed on the 11th of October 1851, and because it was just 6 months, something then had to be done to the building, so it was a consortium of 8 businessmen associated with the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway. They formed a holding company, and they bought property at Penge Hill, or Penge Place, at the top of Sydenham Hill, and they bought the site there, and they dismantled the Crystal Palace from Hyde Park and transported it to Penge Hill and began building it there in 1852. But this time it was with a lot of the parts from Hyde Park, of course, but also many more, in order to build a much more massive structure, internally massive structure. And they also opened 2 railway stations, Crystal Palace High Level from the London, Chatham and Dover, which had a subway on a branch, which had a subway which ran under the palace and led directly to the entrance, and then Crystal Palace Low Level, which is the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway, and that's still there, off Annerley Road, and is the Crystal Palace station as it's known today. And of course the erection of this enormous structure, this exhibition area, gave its name, changed the name of the district from Sydenham Hill to Crystal Palace. In addition to all of the many exhibitions they held in the palace, there were lots of events, concerts, tightrope walking, firework displays, also a whole range of things to entertain Londoners and get them in. In 1911 the Festival of Empire was actually held in the building and its surroundings, and the surroundings have been developed by the owners into a great parkland going down the side of Sydenham Hill, and the gardens were laid out and terraces built, and these gardens included concrete dinosaurs representing the latest discoveries and scientific ideas of the day. These dinosaurs actually made in about 1853, so I mean they look very humorous to us today if we go there and have a look, but of course it's the best sort of knowledge of the time. And as well as all these gardens, of course there were sports grounds laid out further down the site, and this became the basis for what is now the Crystal Palace sports grounds. Well, the palace originally, the move to Sydenham cost about just over £1.25 million in 1853. It was an enormous sum, and they couldn't open on Sundays because of the protest from the church, but eventually in 1860 they were able to do it, and that continued right the way through, and it was very popular. But it began to attract a sort of a down market clientele in the late 1890s. But then after the Festival of Empire, and then of course we had the First World War, the Great War, there was a general rundown of the Crystal Palace, and finally, and very unfortunately, on the 30th of November 1936, something caught fire in the building, and it spread very rapidly, because remember there's a lot of wood in this structure, and it burnt to the ground, and nothing more can now be seen of the remains of Crystal Palace apart from the terrace and the footprint of the building where it once stood. There was one of the water towers, the South Tower, escaped. Both water towers escaped it, but unfortunately they were both demolished and regarded as a landmark for German aircraft in World War II. And of course if the Crystal Palace had survived, it would have been lit up like a Christmas tree, I suppose, by the time of a full moon during the Second World War, so it would have been quite a sight. But various efforts were made to try and use the site, and it has been developed into a sports ground. But now all that remains are those gardens, the terraces, the ghost of the old building, and of course the dinosaurs. I've modelled both versions of the Crystal Palace for use in Trainz railsim as a wonderful feature to incorporate into a model railway, into a railway layout, a simulated railway layout. And this is the Hyde Park version, and you can see the Sydenham version there flickering away in the background. I'll come to that in a moment. But as you can see, it's a very substantial building. I haven't given it transparent windows, so that it just creates a massive feature inside the layout. And if I move over, the other one will appear. Here it is. This is how it appeared at Sydenham, although this, I think it was this one, yeah, this transept burnt down in the 1890s. So for most of its life, for the last 40 years of its life, it was the central hall, this eastern section here, and this or southern section here, and this transept. So it's an absolutely enormous building. And as I mentioned, if it had survived until the time of the Second World War, then something would have had to be done to reduce the brilliance of this enormous glistening crystal building right on the top of Sydenham Hill, just where the TV broadcast or radio broadcast mast is now, which would have acted like a bomb from here. Would have been the sort of message it would give to the Luftwaffe during World War II. But there we are, two enormous Victorian buildings that really celebrate the innovation of the time, and of course both really owe their origins to Joseph Paxton, but also to the railways, because it was the railways that brought the people to the Crystal Palace, first of all in Hyde Park and then in Sydenham. And it was railway engineers who helped design and build both versions of the Crystal Palace. Stephenson and Brunel were both on the building committee for the Hyde Park structure, and it was the combined efforts of directors of the London Brighton South Coast Railway and the London Chatham and Dover Railway that saw it moved and enlarged on Sydenham Hill. So there we are. That's the Crystal Palace, a little bit about the Crystal Palace. I hope it's given you some ideas for how to use these wonderful buildings and keep their memory alive. There is also a Crystal Palace Museum, which you can check out their website online. And if you enjoyed this video, please do subscribe to my channel, do give me a thumbs up, and do leave a comment.